The rope and log barricade across Cinder Pass Trail exploded into splinters as Borgakh Gorehorn drove her dire boar straight through it, her axe still ringing from the blow that had cut the lashings. "Halt, Oathbreaker!" The shout came from behind her, from Ruck, the sentry who had known her since she was a tusked and gangly girl learning to throw a spear. She did not slow. Behind her, torches bobbed in the dark like angry fireflies, and she could hear the war horn sounding the alarm across the ridge, calling every warrior of the Gorehorn clan to the pass to stop her. An arrow hissed past her ear, close enough that she felt the wind of it against her braided hair. Another struck her boar's flank armor and glanced away. She bent low over the beast's neck, ash raining down from a sky gone the color of a bruise, the ground itself trembling beneath her with a deep volcanic shudder that had nothing to do with her clan's fury and everything to do with the doom rolling in from the sea. Borgakh. That was Durgath's voice, deeper than the others, closer than the others. He had been waiting for this. Waiting, she realized with a bitter twist of her heart, for a reason to hate her openly instead of merely wanting her. "Turn back now and I will tell them you were only testing the line. Turn back." She did not turn back. She had already made her choice 3 days ago in the cold dark of her mother's tent, when she had realized what the blockade truly meant and who it would kill. "Tell my mother," she shouted over her shoulder to no one and everyone, "that I love her, and tell her she was wrong." Then the trail dropped away beneath her, down toward the sea and the smoking valley and the lonely light burning atop Blackrock Head, and Borgakh Gorehorn rode down out of the mountains and out of her clan's law, toward the one man who did not yet know that the sky itself was about to fall on him. It had not always been like this between her and the keeper of that light. 3 months earlier, Borgakh had not even known his name. Isaac Mercer had lived at Blackrock Head for 6 years, ever since his uncle Tobias had died of a bad chest and left him the lighthouse, the way another man might leave a nephew a plow horse or a debt. Isaac had taken to the work the way he took to most things in his life, quietly and without complaint, climbing the spiral stair each evening to trim the wick and polish the great lens, watching for the ships that came up from the southern trade routes through the reef-toothed mouth of Imberfall Cove. The cove itself sat like a jewel in a smoking crown, a harbor town built along terraces of black volcanic rock, its streets threaded with steam from 100 natural hot springs that bubbled up through fissures in the earth. Bathhouses with cedar roofs lined the lower terraces, their pools glowing faintly blue and green in the evening light. Merchants sold sulfur-cured fish and volcanic glass jewelry in the market square, and old women boiled their laundry in springs hot enough to scald a careless hand. It was a strange, beautiful, half-wild place, wedged between the mountains and the sea, and Isaac loved it the way a man loves a thing he is not quite part of. He was not quite part of it because of his mother. Isaac Mercer had been the valley's herb healer once, gathering foxglove and steam moss from the hot springs to treat fevers no physician's bleeding could touch. When the old sickness came through Imberfall Cove 10 years before, killing children in their cradles, the town had turned on her instead of thanking her, whispering that no natural cure worked so well without some unnatural bargain behind it. She had been marched before a traveling magistrate, tried as a witch, and exiled from the valley with nothing but the clothes on her back. Isaac, 17 at the time, had never learned what became of her after that, only that she had gone north into the mountains and never sent word again. He had inherited his uncle's lighthouse 2 years later and never left the headland since, as if by staying at the edge of the world he could avoid being swallowed by the middle of it. The town called him the witch's son behind his back and keeper to his face, and left it at that. He did not mind, mostly. The sea did not care what his mother had been. The light did not care. He had made a kind of peace with solitude, until the night the sea threw a dying orc warrior onto the rocks below his tower. The storm that night had come up fast and mean off the western swell, the kind that turned the reef into a churn of white water and dragged fishing boats onto the rocks if the light failed even for a moment. Isaac had been out checking the oil stores in the boathouse when he heard it over the wind and the surf. A low groaning cry, not quite human. He found her wedged between two boulders at the tide line, one leg twisted beneath her, her scouting leathers torn and dark with blood at the shoulder where something, rock or spear he could not tell, had opened a deep gash. She was enormous compared to him, even collapsed and half-drowned, all corded muscle beneath fitted black leather armor cut close to a powerful, graceful frame. Her green-gray skin scraped raw along one cheekbone, tusks small and filed neat, black hair escaping its braid in ropes plastered to her face. Even unconscious, even broken on the rocks, she was the most striking thing Isaac Mercer had ever seen in his life, and his first coherent thought, absurd as it was that she looked like something the sea had made on purpose rather than something it had merely failed to kill. His second thought was that if the town found out he had dragged an orc warrior into his lighthouse instead of leaving her for the tide, they would call it treason before they called it mercy. He carried her inside anyway. She woke near dawn with a war axe's speed, one huge hand closing around his wrist hard enough to grind bone before her eyes even focused, and Isaac found himself staring down the length of her arm into a pair of amber eyes gone wide and murderous. "Where," she said, voice a rasp. "Am I, Blackrock Head Lighthouse," he said, holding very still, very aware of how easily she could break his arm without even trying. "You washed up on the rocks last night. I did not think the tide would be gentler with you than I could be." She studied him for a long, dangerous moment, taking in the small fire, the bandage on her shoulder, the careful stitches, his own work, done by lamplight while she slept, closing the worst of the wound. "You should have let me drown," she said, but her grip loosened and something in her voice was not quite as certain as her words. "Maybe," Isaac agreed, "but I did not." She released his wrist. She did not thank him. Orcs did not thank easily. He would learn, especially not warriors, and especially not this one, who told him only that her name was Borgakh, of Clan Gorehorn, and that she had been scouting the coastline when the storm caught her on the cliffs above his headland, watching for foreign sails the way her clan had watched the sea for generations, wary of the same kingdom soldiers that had made her people's history a long ledger of grief. She left before the tide turned, refusing his offer of dry clothes with a scowl that suggested the offer itself was an insult to her pride, though she did take the strip of cloth he pressed on her for the shoulder wound, and she did pause at the door long enough to say, gruffly, that she supposed the lighthouse man was not entirely useless. Isaac told himself that was the end of it. It was not. She came back 8 days later, at dusk, standing at the base of the tower stair with her arms crossed and an unreadable look on her face, as though she had argued with herself the entire walk down from the ridge and lost. "Among my people," she informed him before he could even say hello, "a life owed is a debt that festers if left unpaid. I am here to pay it. I did not ask for payment. I did not ask if you asked." She looked for just a moment almost uncertain, which seemed so foreign to her whole bearing that Isaac found himself softening toward her instantly. "There is a place, in the valley, hidden. I will show you, and we will call the debt settled, and then you will forget you ever pulled an orc out of the sea." He did not forget. He followed her instead, up through steaming vents and black rock into a fold of the valley he had never known existed, where a hidden hot spring pool sat cupped between stone walls, steam rising so thick it swallowed the stars, the water glowing faintly from some mineral vein beneath the rock. It became, without either of them quite deciding it, their place. Over the following weeks Isaac came to know the sound of her bootsteps on stone before he saw her, the particular way she scowled when she was pleased and did not want him to know it, the surprising gentleness in her enormous hands when she showed him how to properly grip a hunting knife, the low, rough music of her laugh when he told her, badly, an old fisherman's joke his uncle used to tell. "You are a strange little man," she told him once, lounging at the edge of the pool with her strong arms braced behind her, water beating on skin the color of storm clouds, tusks flashing white when she smiled, which she did more and more in his company. Every human I have known has either feared my people or hated them. You do neither. I have not decided yet whether to fear you, Isaac admitted, and she laughed, and the sound of it did something to his chest that no woman's laugh had ever done before. Wise, she said. Fear keeps a man's guard up. Then, quieter, watching him with those amber eyes gone strangely soft. Keep your guard up around me, lighthouse man. I am not known for gentleness. You stitched a bird's broken wing last week and cried when it flew away. I did not cry. You did, I saw it. She had thrown a handful of hot water at him for that, and he had laughed until his sides hurt. And later, walking him back down toward the headland trail in the dark, she had stopped, turned, and kissed him before either of them had said a single word about it. Her hand fisted hard in the front of his shirt, her mouth hungry and certain in a way that left no room for either of them to pretend it was an accident. There, she said afterward, breathing hard, forehead pressed to his. Now you may decide whether to fear me. I am fairly certain, Isaac said, that it is too late for that. He was right. It was too late for both of them, though neither yet understood how much the world outside their hidden pool had already begun to close in. The Ashen Tribunal came into the valley for the first time not long after, a column of gray-cloaked riders under the black and white banner of Inquisitor Aldous Croft, sent by the crown to root out what their proclamations called the tainted witches, half-bloods, orc sympathizers, anyone whose blood or gift did not sit comfortably within the lines the kingdom had drawn around what was human and what was not. They came with a story about a border village burned by an orc raiding party, though Isaac noticed, standing at the edge of the market square listening to Croft's speech from horseback, that the Inquisitor never said which clan, or produced a single witness, or seemed especially interested in an answer. Any household, Croft told the gathered townsfolk, his voice carrying easily over the hiss of the springs, found sheltering the tainted, consorting with the enemy, or practicing the old unnatural arts, will answer to the crown's justice. We do this valley a mercy. We burn the rot before it spreads. Isaac felt the old fear settle into his stomach like a stone, the same fear he had carried since he was 17, and watched his mother marched out of the square in chains for the crime of knowing which herbs eased a fever. He said nothing. He went home to the lighthouse, and that night at the hidden pool, he told Borgakh everything and watched her jaw tighten with an anger that made the steam around them seem to still. They burned a village and blame my people for it, she said low. So they may have their excuse to burn more. You knew of this. My clan has always known men like Croft exist. We have simply never had one so close before. She looked at him, something fierce and protective flickering behind her eyes. You are the son of a woman they called a witch. If they learn what you are to me, I know what happens, Isaac said quietly. I watched it happen to her. Borgakh reached across the space between them and took his face in both huge hands, careful, so careful, the way she had learned to be with him from the very first night. Then we will simply not let them learn, she said. I did not survive the sea to lose you to a man with a banner and a grudge. It should have been enough, that fierce promise, spoken beside a glowing pool with the stars swallowed by steam. But promises made in hidden places have a way of being tested in open ones, and the valley was not large enough to hide two hearts forever. The trouble began, as trouble so often does, with pride that had nowhere else to go. Durgeth Ironjaw had led the Gorehorn warband for 11 years, had killed more kingdom soldiers than any warrior his age, and had decided, with the same certainty he brought to every battle, that Borgakh Gorehorn would be his mate. He said as much at the autumn gathering, standing before the whole clan fire with his chest out and his voice ringing off the hide tents, and Borgakh, who respected his strength and disliked nearly everything else about him, had refused him flatly in front of everyone, a public humiliation he had not forgiven. You grow cold, Gorehorn, he told her afterward, cornering her near the picket line where the boars were tethered. Cold and secretive, and always slipping off toward the coast on scouting runs no one asked you to take. What is down there that interests you more than your own clan? The coast interests my clan whether you notice it or not, she said, brushing past him, though her heart had gone tight and cold in her chest at how close his guess had landed. He watched her go. He did not believe her, and a man who does not believe a woman he wants to possess is a dangerous kind of enemy, one who watches instead of shouting, who waits instead of accusing, who follows a set of quiet footprints down a mountain trail one night simply to see where they lead. Meanwhile, in Imberfall Cove, a different kind of trouble circled Isaac in the shape of Myrle Dane, the harbor merchant's daughter, pretty and practical and entirely unaware that the man she had decided to court already belonged, heart and soul, to someone else. She found him at the market one gray afternoon, complimented his carving of a gull he'd been whittling to sell, and lingered rather longer than the transaction required, laughing at things that were not especially funny, laying a hand once on his forearm in a way that would have meant nothing at all if a certain orc warrior had not been watching from the tree line above the square with her arms crossed and her amber eyes gone flat and dangerous. She touched you, Borgakh said flatly later at the pool before Isaac had even finished undoing his boots. She touched my arm for a moment while buying a wooden gull. I saw her hand linger. Borgakh, I am simply making an observation. She did not look at him, staring instead at the steam rising off the water, her jaw set in a way he now recognized very well. You may sell her whatever birds you like. I only wish it understood that you are already claimed lighthouse man, whether the market girl knows it or not. Isaac crossed the space between them, crouched in front of her, and took one of her huge hands in both of his, small and pale against her gray-green skin. I have never wanted anyone the way I want you, he said. Not before you pulled me under with that first kiss, and not since. There is no market girl. There is no one. There has only ever been you from the moment the sea gave you to me. Something in her face cracked open, the fierce, jealous set of it dissolving into something raw and almost frightened. I do not know how to want something this much, she admitted, quiet, the confession costing her visibly. I have fought armies, Isaac Mercer. I have never once been afraid the way I am afraid of losing you. You will not lose me, he promised, and meant it with everything he had, not yet knowing how close they both stood to the edge of exactly that. The valley held its autumn hot spring festival 3 weeks later, when the whole town came down to the lower terraces at dusk to bathe in the ceremonial pools, string paper lanterns along the cedar walkways, and give thanks to whatever spirit the sulfur springs were meant to honor before the first frost. It was reckless of them to go, and they both knew it, but Isaac had asked, half-joking, whether an orc warrior could ever be brave enough to walk among lanterns and human laughter for even one stolen hour, and Borgakh, who could never resist a challenge to her courage, had said only, "Watch me," and worn a long dark cloak with the hood drawn low, and come down the mountain to stand beside him at the edge of the crowd. For one golden hour it was almost like being an ordinary couple in an ordinary town. They shared a bowl of spiced riverfish stew from a lantern-lit stall, passing the single spoon between them, her knee pressed against his beneath the table, her low laugh drawing no more attention than any other travelers might. They walked the upper terrace pool at the quiet edge of the festival, away from the densest crowd, and when Isaac reached up to push back her hood so he could see her face properly in the lantern light, she caught his wrist and kissed him instead, deep and unhurried, her arms circling him with a possessive tenderness that made the whole steaming valley seem to hold its breath. It was in that unguarded moment, lips still on his, hood fallen back to bare her tusks and her braided hair in the open lantern light, that Inquisitor Croft's patrol rounded the terrace wall on their evening inspection of the festival, and a young warden's torch swung directly across both their faces. The torchlight froze on them like a held breath before the scream came. "Orc!" Someone shrieked, a woman near the stew stall, dropping her bowl, and the single word rippled outward through the crowd like a stone thrown into still water, laughter dying into shouts, lanterns swaying as people scrambled backward, and within 3 heartbeats there were crossbows leveled and spearpoints lowered and 40 terrified, furious faces turned on the two of them at the edge of the glowing pool. "Stand away from her, Mercer." Croft's voice cut through the chaos, ice calm in a way that was far more frightening than the shouting around him. He rode his horse forward through the parting crowd, torchlight throwing his shadow huge against the bathhouse wall, and his eyes, when they found Isaac's face, held a terrible flicker of satisfaction, as if a puzzle he had been turning over for weeks had finally clicked into place. The witch's son. Of course. Blood calls to blood, does it not? Your mother consorted with unnatural things, and now so do you. "She is not unnatural," Isaac said, and stepped, without any conscious decision to do so, directly between Borgakh and the ring of leveled spears, his back to her, his chest exposed to every point in that circle. "She is a woman. She has done this valley no harm. She is an orc scout inside the walls of a human town during a time of war," Croft said. "That alone is a hanging offense, keeper. Step aside." "No." Behind him, Borgakh's hand closed on his shoulder, and for one terrible heartbeat he thought she meant to shove him aside and fight her way clear. And he knew with total certainty that if she raised a weapon here, among this crowd in this light, nothing either of them said afterward would matter. She would be an invading orc who drew blood on human soil, and every fear the town had ever whispered about her kind would be proven true in front of 100 witnesses. "Do not fight them," he said, low, not turning. "Please. If you fight them here, this is over. Run. I will follow." For one more heartbeat she did not move, every muscle in her powerful frame coiled and ready, amber eyes locked on the ring of spears with the flat, calculating fury of a warrior, deciding exactly how many men she could put down before the first blade found her. Then, astonishingly, she let go of her rage instead of her restraint. She grabbed Isaac's hand, turned, and ran, dragging him bodily off his feet for the first 2 strides, straight through a gap in the crowd where fear had made a hole faster than anger could close it, vaulting a low garden wall with him half carried under one powerful arm, sprinting up through steam and shouting torchlight into the dark safety of the high rocks, arrows and one loosed crossbow bolt hissing past them into the black. They did not stop running until the sounds of the town had faded behind the ridge, until they stood gasping in the cold mountain air, with the glow of Blackrock Head's lighthouse beam sweeping steady and distant far below. "They know your face now," Isaac said between breaths, horror sinking into him at what they had just barely escaped. "Both our faces. They knew what my kind looked like before tonight," Borgakh said grimly. "Now they simply have a reason to hunt one in particular." She looked at him, and for the first time since he had known her, he saw real fear in her eyes, not for herself, he realized, but for him. "You should not have stood in front of me, Isaac. A spear does not care that you love me. I would rather it found me than you. Do not say such things." Her voice cracked on the words. "I have buried enough of my own kind on enough battlefields to know exactly what a body looks like after it stops something meant for someone else. I will not bury you too." They did not have long to argue the point. High on the ridge above them, unseen in the dark, Durgath Ironjaw lowered his spyglass with hands that trembled with something far colder than the mountain air, having followed Borgakh's tracks to the festival out of jealous suspicion and witnessed, from a hidden vantage above the terrace wall, everything. The kiss, the torch, the drawn weapons, and Borgakh Gorehorn running from human soldiers with a human man's hand locked in hers. He did not go to help her. He turned his boar's head north, toward the mountain camp, toward Chiefess Vraina Gorehorn's fire, carrying news that would reach the clan long before Borgakh herself did. Vraina Gorehorn had led the clan for 23 years, had buried a husband and 2 brothers to human blades, and loved her daughter with a ferocity she rarely let anyone see beneath her chiefess's mask. When Durgath brought his report to her fire 2 nights later, breathless and self-righteous, claiming duty rather than jealousy as his motive, Vraina listened without moving a single muscle of her weathered face, and did not speak until he had finished. "You are certain," she said at last, "that it was my daughter?" I would know her silhouette across a battlefield, chiefess. It was her, kissing a human, fleeing human soldiers hand in hand with him like a common camp girl. Something dangerous moved behind Vraina's eyes, though whether it was aimed at Durgath, at her daughter, or at the whole cruel unfairness of a world that could not simply leave her clan in peace, even Durgath could not say. Borgakh returned to the mountain camp the following dusk, exhausted, half her cloak scorched from a tribunal patrol's fire arrow that had nearly caught her on the ridge trail, and found her mother waiting for her outside the great fire tent, alone, arms crossed, face carved from stone. "Durgath tells me," Vraina said without preamble, "that my daughter has been lying with a human keeper while our own people whisper that the tribunal's noose tightens around this valley by the week." Borgakh did not lie to her mother. She had never been able to and would not start now, not about this. "His name is Isaac Mercer. I love him." Vraina's composure cracked for exactly 1 instant, grief and fear flashing raw across her features before the chiefess's mask slammed back down. "Then you have made yourself a target for every blade in this valley, human and orc alike, and you have made this clan a target beside you. The moment word spreads that a Gorehorn warrior beds a human while his kind hunts ours for sport. He is not like the others. He stood between me and a tribunal patrol's spears and did not flinch. He is one man, Borgakh. One man against a kingdom that has decided our blood is a plague to be burned out of the land. I have watched that kingdom burn villages for less than what you have done. Then let me protect him. You cannot even protect yourself from what you have started." Vraina's voice softened just slightly, just enough for Borgakh to see the mother beneath the chiefess for one breath. "I am sealing the pass. No Gorehorn crosses into human lands until this madness in the valley burns itself out and no human enters ours. You will remain here under my eye until I judge it safe to speak of this again. Mother, this is not a request, Borgakh Gorehorn. It is the law of this clan, and you will obey it, or you will answer as any warrior answers who breaks faith with her own blood." It was 3 days after the blockade closed the pass, 3 days of Borgakh pacing the camp like a caged storm, that the true shape of the danger revealed itself, and it was far worse than either mother or daughter had imagined. A tribunal courier, thrown from his horse and injured on a mountain track, was found and quietly questioned by clan scouts before he could be returned or executed outright. What he carried, half delirious with fever and fear, was a set of sealed orders from Inquisitor Croft's own hand to a garrison further south. A plan to strike Emberful Cove during the coming volcanic storm surge that every fisherman and every clan scout could already feel building in their bones, the ground trembling, the springs boiling harder, the sea pulling back from the shore in a long, unnatural retreat that any coastal soul knew meant a wall of water was coming. Croft intended to use the chaos and confusion of the disaster to purge the valley of every soul his tribunal had marked as tainted, drowning his crimes beneath a natural catastrophe no one could later untangle from deliberate murder. And then, once the town lay half in ruins, to march his soldiers into the mountains under the banner of righteous retaliation, claiming the orc clans had struck during the storm. A lie sturdy enough to justify a war of extermination. The crown had wanted an excuse for since long before Borgakh Gorehorn was born. Vraina received this news at her council fire with her closest warriors gathered, Durgath among them, and made her decision with the same cold calculation that had kept her clan alive for 2 decades. "We seal the pass entirely," she said. "No warning goes to the humans. Let their storm and their tribunal devour each other. When the ash settles, we will still be here, untouched, and no lie about an orc raid will hold weight if there was no possible way for any Gorehorn to have reached that valley." "They will die," Borgakh said, standing so fast her chair overturned behind her. "Hundreds of them, Isaac." "Isaac Mercer is not this clan's burden," Vraina said, and there was real pain beneath the hardness of her voice, the pain of a mother closing a door she knew would break her daughter's heart to keep her daughter's body safe. "The pass is sealed. That is the end of this council. it was not the end. Borgakh Gorehorn sat alone that night beneath a sky gone thick and orange with ash glow, and understood with total clarity that her mother's law and her own heart had finally, irreversibly diverged, and that she would rather be an oathbreaker who saved the man she loved than an obedient daughter who let him drown or burn, while she stood safely behind a wall of logs and spears. She wrote nothing down. Orcs did not trust ink the way humans did, but she sat with her mother's old ceremonial knife in her hands for a long while before dawn, turning it over, thinking of the woman who had raised her to be fearless, and who would now, by that same fearlessness, call her a traitor. Then she saddled her direboar, strapped on her axe, and rode for the pass. The blockade line held 6 warriors that night, torches lit against the gathering ashfall, Durgath himself commanding them, as if some part of him had known she would come and had arranged to be the one standing in her way when she did. "Turn back, Borgakh," he called as she approached at a canter, his own weapon still sheathed, a strange plea beneath the command in his voice. "I do not want to be the one who reports this to your mother. I do not want to be the one who fights you." "Then do not," she said. "Stand aside, Durgath. You would break clan law for a human." "I would break clan law to stop hundreds of people from dying in a storm your pride helped hide from them," she said, and something in her voice made even the other sentries shift uneasily, torches wavering. "Ask yourself, war leader, whether the vengeance you want against me is worth the deaths that follow if I do not warn them." For one long moment Durgath did not move, and Borgakh thought, foolishly, that perhaps he would simply let her pass in silence, that some sliver of honor beneath his jealousy would win out. Then he drew his blade, and the barricade guards raised their spears, and the choice was made for both of them. She did not want to fight him. She would remember later that even as her axe met his blade in a shower of sparks under the torchlight, even as she wheeled her boar hard to break past the log barrier, she had felt no triumph in besting him, only a grim, aching sorrow that it had come to blades between 2 people who had once, in some distant careless season, called each other clan. She struck the lashings of the barricade instead of striking Durgath a second time, splitting the rope with one clean blow, and drove her boar straight through the gap as the logs collapsed, arrows loosed behind her, one grazing her upper arm hot and sharp, Ruck's furious shout of "Halt, Oathbreaker!" chasing her down the dark trail into the ash-choked night. She did not look back. She had already said her goodbye to her mother in her heart, hours before, and now there was only the storm, and the road, and the man waiting at the end of it who did not yet know the sky was about to fall. Isaac was on the lighthouse gallery when he saw her coming. A dark shape flying down the coast rode on a boar's back faster than any messenger he had ever seen, ash sifting down around her like gray snow, the sea behind her drawn back from the shore in a long, unnatural retreat that made every hair on his arm stand up even before he understood why. "Isaac." Her voice reached him before she did, raw and desperate, and he was already halfway down the spiral stair by the time she reined her exhausted mount to a rearing stop at the base of the tower, half falling from the saddle into his arms, blood soaking one sleeve, her face streaked with ash and something that might have been tears or might simply have been the storm. "You are hurt," he said, hands flying over her, checking the wound. "There is no time for that." She gripped his shoulders hard enough to bruise, forcing him to look at her, at the terror and urgency burning behind her amber eyes. "Listen to me. The sea is pulling back because a wave is coming, a great one tonight before dawn, and Croft means to use it. He has soldiers already moving toward the lower terraces to seal the town gates once the water rises, to drown or burn every marked soul while the storm gives him cover, and then to march on my clan and call it vengeance for a raid that never happened. I broke my own clan's blockade to reach you, Isaac. I have no home to go back to now but this one. We have to warn them, all of them, now." Isaac did not waste a single breath asking how she knew, or what it had cost her to ride through her own kin's spears to tell him. He had spent 6 years trimming a wick every night for ships that might never come, waiting for a purpose larger than himself, and here it was, delivered to his doorstep on a bleeding, magnificent, impossible woman who had burned every bridge behind her to save people who had thrown spears at her only nights before. "Then we ring the bell," he said, "and we pray they listen." They did not listen easily. Imberfall Cove's harbor bell had not rung a storm warning in a generation, and when it began tolling wild and frantic in the deep of the night, half the town poured into the square in confusion and half-dress, only to freeze in horror at the sight that greeted them. Isaac Mercer, the witch's son, standing atop the harbor steps beside the very orc warrior they had chased out of their festival days before, her arm bound in a bloody bandage, ash falling like snow around them both. "She has come to kill us in our beds," someone shouted, and the crowd surged with fear, torches and pitchforks and one leveled crossbow rising toward Borgakh in the flickering dark. "She has come to save your lives." Isaac's voice cracked across the square louder than he had ever spoken in his life, and he stepped forward between Borgakh and the crowd, exactly as he had at the festival, though this time the crowd numbered in the hundreds and the danger was a rising sea rather than a single tribunal patrol. "Look at the water. Look at the tide. It has pulled back 300 yards from the harbor wall in one night. Has any of you ever in your lives seen the sea do that and stay calm afterward? A wave is coming, and Inquisitor Croft means to use the chaos to slaughter every one of you his tribunal has marked, and blame it on an orc raid that was never real. She broke faith with her own clan, her own mother, to warn you. If that is not proof enough of her heart, then nothing I say will convince you, and we will all drown arguing about it." The crowd's fury wavered, uncertain, torn between old fear and the sheer, undeniable strangeness of the retreating sea glinting under the ash-red moon behind them. It was the old harbor master Gruff Tomas Ryle who had sailed these waters 40 years, who broke the silence, staring hard at that impossible stretch of exposed wet sand where the tide should have been. "I have never seen the water do that," he said slowly, "except once when I was a boy before the wave that took my father's boat. Ring every bell in this town. Get the children up to the terrace shrine. Move the fishing boats now, not the harbor, up past the second terrace where the water cannot reach." Chaos turned in the space of one old sailor's fear into desperate, purposeful motion. Borgakh did not wait to be thanked or trusted. She simply moved, hauling a stalled cart free from a collapsing stable with strength that made grown men stagger back in awe, carrying 2 shrieking children under each powerful arm up the terrace steps, while their mother sobbed thanks she had no words for, wading into the retreating harbor shallows to physically drag a fisherman's dory up past the tide line before the wave came for it. The wave, when it arrived just before dawn, was worse than even old Tomas Ryle had feared. A black wall of water lit orange from beneath by the volcano's restless glow, crashing over the lower terraces and boiling the harbor into froth. But the town had moved. The children were high on the shrine terrace. The boats were lashed above the tide line, and though homes were lost and the lower bathhouses swept to ruin, not a single soul among the people who had heeded the bell was taken by the sea that night. Croft's tribunal soldiers were not so fortunate in their timing. They had moved to seal the lower gates exactly as planned, expecting a panicked, trapped town to slaughter in the name of purification, and found instead empty streets and a wall of water bearing down on their own ranks. Isaac, racing back up the tower stair through howling wind to relight the great lamp after a gust extinguished it, watched from the gallery as the Inquisitor's own column scattered in disarray before the flood, Croft himself dragged from his horse by 2 of his own frightened men, and hauled to higher ground, stripped in that single desperate hour of every shred of the cold authority he had ridden into the valley with. Borgakh found Isaac at the top of the tower as the worst of the wave receded, both of them soaked, ash-streaked, trembling with exhaustion and the particular giddy disbelief of people who have survived something they were certain would kill them. She did not say anything at first. She simply pulled him into her arms, so hard the breath left him in a rush, and held him there against the light of the great lamp turning steady behind them, guiding the last frightened fishing boats safely home through the settling storm. "You are shaking," Isaac murmured into her shoulder. "I have never in my life been so afraid," she admitted, voice raw. "Not of the wave, of arriving too late, of finding you already gone." "I am here," he said. "You did not arrive too late. You broke your own clan's law to make sure of that." "I would break it 1,000 times more," she said fiercely, drawing back to look at him, ash and tears mixing on her cheeks, "for you." Below them, in the ruined lower square, Inquisitor Croft's authority did not survive the dawn. Townsfolk who had spent the terrible night hauling each other to safety turned on the soldiers who had, in their panic, trampled 2 elderly women trying to force the harbor gate against the flood. And it was the harbor master Tomas Ryle himself, with half the fishing fleet's men behind him, who finally cornered Croft against the wrecked bathhouse wall. "You would have let us drown," Ryle said, voice shaking with a fury 40 years of quiet town-keeping had never before required. "You would have called it an orc raid and burned our whole valley for it. That orc woman up there did more to save this town in one night than your tribunal has done in a month of terrorizing it. Get off our shore, Inquisitor, before we decide the sea did not finish its work." Croft, bedraggled and stripped of his mounted authority, his soldiers scattered and half of them already quietly disappearing rather than answer for the night's failures, had no crowd left to burn, no fear left to weaponize, and no choice but to gather what remained of his column and ride north before the town's fury outpaced his men's discipline. He did not return. Word would reach the valley weeks later that his conduct had drawn the Crown's own scrutiny, once reports of the storm and his failed purge reached the capital, and that the Ashen Tribunal's grip on the valley had been quietly, permanently loosened, though none of that mattered nearly so much, in the days that followed, as what happened on the terrace steps of Imberfall Cove 3 mornings after the wave. The town gathered there in the pale, ash-softened sunlight to bury what they had lost and take stock of what they had kept, and it was there, before nearly the whole of Imberfall Cove, that Borgakh Gorehorn stood at Isaac Mercer's side without a hood to hide her face, and did not flinch when every eye in the square turned toward her. Tomas Ryle spoke first, an old man's voice carrying easily across the crowd. "This town owes its children's lives to an orc warrior, who broke her own people's law to warn us of a storm we would not have believed without her. I do not know what history says we owe her kind, but I know what my own eyes saw 3 nights past, and I will not spit on the hand that pulled my grandson out of a flooding street." There was a long silence, the particular silence of a town's old fears struggling against the plain evidence of its own rescue. Then, one by one, the murmurs shifted, and someone Myrle Dane, of all people, the merchant's daughter who had once flirted with Isaac in the market without knowing what she trespassed against, stepped forward and pressed a small woven token of thanks into Borgakh's huge hand, the traditional harbor gift given after a life saved, and the gesture broke something loose in the crowd that no speech alone could have. It was not instant forgiveness, nor complete. Old fear does not dissolve in a single morning, and there would be those in Imberfall Cove who eyed Borgakh warily for seasons yet. But it was enough, that first crack of acceptance in the crowd's frozen silence, for Isaac to feel, standing there with her hand engulfing his, that the impossible thing they had both risked everything for might actually be allowed to survive in daylight, and not only in a hidden pool wrapped in steam. The final threads did not close without one more journey up the mountain. 2 weeks after the storm, once the worst of the valley's flood damage had been cleared, and the hot springs had settled back into their familiar rhythm, a small clan procession came down from the sealed pass under a banner of truce, led not by Durgath, who rode a length behind with a bandaged shoulder and a chastened set to his jaw, but by Vraina Gorehorn herself, come to see with her own eyes whether the daughter she had all but disowned still lived, and whether the human valley her clan had abandoned to its fate had, against all odds, survived it. The reunion happened on the coast road below Blackrock Head, mother and daughter facing each other in the wind with Isaac standing a respectful few steps back, his heart in his throat, unsure whether he was about to watch a reconciliation or a sentencing. "You broke the blockade," Vrena said, without preamble, studying her daughter's face for a long moment before her eyes dropped to the healed scar along Borgakh's arm. "I did," Borgakh said, chin lifted, refusing to soften the truth even now. "I would do it again tonight if the storm came again tomorrow." "The courier we captured," Vrena said slowly, "was not the last message our scouts intercepted. Word has reached me since that Croft's true orders came from higher than his own ambition, that the plan to burn this valley and blame our clan was set to unfold regardless of anything either of us did, and that if you had not ridden down that night, the wave and the fire together might have given the crown exactly the pretext it wanted to march an army into these mountains within the season." Her chiefess's mask, for the first time in Borgakh's memory, cracked all the way open, grief and pride, and something achingly like relief moving plainly across her weathered face. "You did not simply save a town of humans, my daughter. You may have saved this entire clan the war it could not have won." "I did not know that when I rode," Borgakh admitted quietly. "I only knew I could not let him die not knowing." Vrena's gaze moved finally to Isaac, standing pale and silent at the edge of the road, and for a long, searching moment the chiefess studied the ordinary, unremarkable man her extraordinary daughter had thrown away a clan's law to save. "You are the lighthouse keeper," she said at last. "I am chiefess. You stood between my daughter and human spears at your own festival, I am told, and again before your own frightened town on the night of the storm. I would do it every night if it kept her safe." Vrena was quiet for a long moment, the wind pulling at her braided gray hair, the sea beyond them calm and blue and utterly unlike the black fury it had shown days before. "My people have a custom," she said finally. "For a warrior who chooses to bind herself to one outside the clan, it requires her mother's blessing or her mother's blade, depending on how the mother feels about the choice. A ghost of something that might, on a kinder face, have been called a smile touched the corner of her mouth. I find, against every instinct 23 years of leading this clan has taught me, that I would rather give you my blessing than my blade, lighthouse keeper. Do not make me regret it." "I never will," Isaac promised, and meant it with every fiber of the quiet, steady heart that had waited alone at the edge of the world for 6 years before the sea finally gave him someone worth waiting for. The blessing, when it came that same evening at the hidden hot spring pool where it had all begun, was not the elaborate binding ceremony of clan legend, but something smaller and truer. Vrena herself, drawing a thin curved blade across her own palm and her daughter's, pressing their bleeding hands together over the steaming water in the old clan way, murmuring words in the Gorehorn tongue that Isaac did not fully understand but felt anyway, deep in his chest, as a kind of homecoming. Borgakh, in turn, took a small carved wooden bird from the pocket of her mended leathers, the very same gull Isaac had once whittled and sold at the market before either of them had understood what they were becoming to each other, and pressed it into his palm, closing his fingers around it with both of her huge hands. "I have carried this since the festival," she confessed. "I could not bring myself to sell what my own hands had touched while wanting you. I gave that to the market. I bought it back the very next morning before dawn, so no one would see an orc haggling over a wooden bird." She laughed, low and rough, the sound he had come to treasure above almost every other sound in the world. "You may consider it, if you like, the first thing I ever claimed as mine that belonged, in truth, to you." He kissed her then, unhurried and certain, with the steam rising warm around them and her mother's blessing still drying dark on both their palms, and understood, with a clarity that felt like the lighthouse beam finally finding a ship lost far too long at sea, that he was no longer the witch's son standing alone at the edge of a world that did not want him. He was Isaac Mercer, chosen fiercely, deliberately, unshakably chosen, by a warrior who could have had any life she wanted, and had ridden through fire and her own family's spears to build one instead with him. Imberfall Cove held its full autumn harvest festival again the following season, the first since the storm, the terraces rebuilt, the paper lanterns strung fresh along the cedar walkways. And this time there was no torchlight patrol waiting to shatter the evening, no hood drawn low to hide a face the town had learned, hard and honestly, not to fear. Borgakh Gorehorn walked the lower terrace on Isaac Mercer's arm in the open lantern light, her braided hair threaded now with a small clan ornament of horn and silver that marked her, in the old way, as bound to a chosen mate. And though a few older townsfolk still crossed themselves or looked away, far more came forward, the way Tomas Ryle did, clasping her forearm in the fisherman's grip of respect, or the way the harbor master's grandson did, tugging on her sleeve to ask wide-eyed whether it was true she had ridden through an entire storm on a giant boar to save the town, a story that had already, in the way of small harbor towns, grown taller with every telling. Something like that, Borgakh told the boy solemnly, and Isaac, watching her crouch to his height with a gentleness that still, after everything, managed to surprise him, felt his chest ache with a happiness he had never once let himself imagine, back when he had climbed the tower stair alone every night with only the sea for company. Later, when the lanterns had burned low and the crowd had thinned toward home, they walked together up the coast road toward Blackrock Head, the great light sweeping its steady beam out over calm dark water, guiding no ship in particular that night, simply doing, as it always had, the quiet and necessary work of telling anyone lost in the dark that there was a safe harbor waiting, if only they knew where to look for it. "Regrets?" Isaac asked, as they climbed the last rise toward the tower, her hand warm and enormous and perfectly fitted around his. "One," Borgakh said, and when he looked at her, alarmed, she was smiling, tusks bright in the lantern glow, amber eyes warm as the hidden pool that had first sheltered them. "That the sea did not throw me onto your rocks sooner, lighthouse man. 6 years you sat up there alone. 6 years I could have been claiming you instead of merely admiring you from a scouting ridge. I did not know you were watching." "I watch everything worth watching," she said, drawing him close against her at the tower door, the light turning slow and steady above them both. "I have simply never in all my life found anything worth watching quite so much as you." She kissed him there at the threshold of the only home either of them had left to lose, the storm long past, the blockade behind them, her clan's blessing drying into an old scar on her palm and his heart finally, fully, unshakably found, and neither the sea nor the mountains nor any law of clan or crown ever came between them again.